I came home from a business trip to find my bedroom locked and all my belongings shoved into the garage like I was a stranger. I'm Eleanor, a mother who thought kindness would be enough, until my own daughter-in-law taught me otherwise. What would you do if your family tried to erase you from your own home? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear. I dragged my carry-on suitcase across the slick driveway, the wheels bumping unevenly against cracks I had been meaning to fix. A thin drizzle hung in the air, the kind of damp November rain that always made the cedar shingles smell richer, earthier. The porch light was off, which struck me as odd. I'd texted Daniel about the flight delay from Chicago. I expected at least the lamp to be on. After 3 days of negotiating with clients and flying home through holiday weekend chaos, I wanted nothing more than the comfort of my own bed, my mother's quilt tucked around me, and the faint hum of the heater. Instead, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked in my usual spot. Sleek, black, a Mercedes sedan that still smelled of showroom wax. I stopped for a moment, frowning at the reflection of the streetlight on its polished hood. Daniel didn't drive anything like that. He had his old Honda, reliable, slightly dented near the bumper. This belonged to someone else, someone who had already taken my place before I even turned the key. I let myself in. The front door resisted, sticking just slightly, as though the house itself was bracing. Inside, the air smelled of candles, lavender and vanilla layered too thickly, Maddie's signature scent. I set down my suitcase carefully on the rug and listened. No voices, no television, only the muted patter of rain against the windows. I climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under my familiar steps. That was when I saw it. My bedroom door shut, a crooked note taped to it in Daniel's handwriting. The ink pressed too hard, letters slanted as if written in a rush. "Mom, guest room for you tonight. Maddie's parents arrived early. Thanks for understanding." Understanding. The word pricked more sharply than the pin I kept in my travel blazer pocket. I pulled the note off and stood staring at the door handle. My own door, locked from the inside. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe Daniel was waiting with a surprise, something innocent. But the Mercedes outside told a different story. The guest room was down the hall. I pushed the door open. Darkness. I flicked on the light. Empty. Completely bare. The bed gone. The quilt chest gone. The curtains pulled. Not even the old floral spread I had left for guests. It was stripped to drywall and dust bunnies. A hollow echo replaced what had once been a space for visiting cousins, book club friends, even my late sister that one summer she'd needed rest. "What in the world?" I whispered aloud, but the answer came before I could finish. Maddie stood at the end of the hall, arms folded across her silk pajama top, blonde hair smooth as if she had just stepped from a stylist's chair, not a home where dishes still sat crusted in the sink. A thin smile cut across her face, the kind of smile she wore when she wanted me to know she had already won. "Looking for something?" she asked, tilting her head like a cat toying with a bird. "My things," I said, my voice lower than I expected. "Where are they?" "Oh, those old things," she answered lightly. "I moved them out, made room for my parents. They deserve the best while they're here." She nodded toward the master suite, my room. "I thought you'd be fine in the alternative space." "Alternative space?" Her tone made it sound like a polite offer instead of the exile it was. "Which space exactly?" I asked. "The garage. Don't worry, I was thoughtful, covered everything with plastic sheets." She smoothed an invisible crease on her sleeve, watching me. "I even stacked things neatly." I swallowed, the air catching in my throat. She had put my life, photographs, my mother's jewelry box, years of memories, into the garage like leftovers from a yard sale. "That's my bedroom," I said evenly, though my hands were trembling. "Well, technically, it's Daniel's now," she replied, her laugh light, almost musical, the kind of sound that played well at cocktail parties. "We're married, and my parents are here to meet their grandson properly." They need the best accommodations. Daddy's back can't handle lumpy mattresses, and Mother is a light sleeper. You wouldn't want to disturb them, would you? She glanced down at her nails, as though I were the inconvenience. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I turned toward the stairs and walked down. The air cooled as I opened the door to the garage. The smell hit me first. Motor oil, fertilizer, the faint metallic tang of tools. In the corner, stacks rose against the wall under a film of plastic. My clothes, my photo albums, boxes labeled with my handwriting. I pulled back one sheet and found the quilt my mother had sewn in 1933. Soft blue squares patched with scraps from her old dresses. It smelled of gasoline now. I pressed it to my cheek, the fabric rougher than I remembered, tears stinging but not falling. This wasn't a room shuffle. It was a demotion, a hierarchy drawn in neat, cruel lines. Maddie's parents at the top, Daniel at her side, and me, relegated to a cold space beside paint cans and holiday decorations. I folded the quilt carefully, laid it back on the pile, and straightened. My reflection glinted in the small garage window. My blazer still buttoned, my hair frizzed from travel. I looked like a stranger in my own home. Back upstairs, Maddie was still in the hallway. She raised her brows, smug, as if waiting for me to protest. Instead, I lifted my suitcase, wheeled it toward the narrow steps leading up to the old office above the garage, and said quietly, "Noted." Her smile widened, satisfied with my compliance. But she had no idea. No idea whose name was on the deed she was dismissing. No idea that patience has teeth. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps on hardwood and the faint clink of dishes. My back ached from the narrow cot above the garage, the kind of ache that seeps in overnight and greets you before your eyes even open. My suitcase sat in the corner, still zipped, because I couldn't face the thought of unpacking in that makeshift exile. I pulled on my blazer again, the same one I had worn home from Chicago, and made my way into the main house. The kitchen smelled of coffee and rosemary eggs. My copper pans were scattered on the stove, butter smudges across the marble counter I'd once guarded so carefully. Maddie glided around the room in a silk robe, humming as though she were hosting a lifestyle show. Without looking up, she gestured toward the tray on the counter. "Oh, good, you're up," she said, her voice brisk, professional. "Could you be a dear and take this upstairs to my parents? They prefer breakfast in bed when they travel." On the tray, my grandmother's bone china cups held steaming coffee, their handles delicate as bird wings. Fresh fruit was arranged in concentric circles, strawberries at the center like jewels. The eggs were perfectly folded, herbs sprinkled as though she'd practiced plating for photographs. For a moment, I stood frozen, one hand still on the strap of my purse. My mother's words echoed in my mind, words she'd repeated to me when I was younger. Hospitality without respect is just servitude. I had offered this house out of generosity. Somehow, that generosity had been converted into my servitude. "I'm sure you don't mind," Maddie added, adjusting her robe sleeve with the ease of someone used to giving orders. The tray was heavier than it looked, requiring both hands. I carried it carefully up the stairs. The master bedroom door, my bedroom door, was already open. Inside, Richard Brooks lounged against my pillows, reading the Wall Street Journal as if he had owned the subscription. Elaine sat at my vanity table, applying mascara in the mirror where I had once checked my hair before heading out to teach Sunday school. Neither of them looked at me. "About time," Richard muttered, not glancing up from his paper. Elaine flicked her hand toward the bedside table. "Just set it there. We don't like clutter." I placed the tray on the polished wood, the china rattling slightly as my arms trembled. They didn't thank me. I could have been the maid. I could have been invisible. When I returned downstairs, Maddie was tapping on her phone, her bare feet propped up on my coffee table. She looked up briefly. "Oh, great, you handled it. So listen, I thought we'd have some people over tonight. Just a small dinner party. Daniel's colleagues and their wives. Nothing fancy." My heart tightened. How many people? Oh, maybe 12. I already ordered catering. The garden will look magical with lights. You don't mind helping serve, do you? It would mean so much to Daniel if everything went smoothly. Helping serve. In my own home. At a party I hadn't even been invited to as a guest. Of course, I said, because the alternative would have been a confrontation I wasn't ready for. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, catering trucks backed into the driveway. Strands of white lights were draped across my garden, the same garden I had planted with daffodil bulbs one rainy weekend long before Maddie entered our lives. Tables were set with rented linens, platters arrived in silver trays, balanced by young men in black polo shirts. Maddie directed them with the authority of a stage manager. "Move that table closer to the fountain," she called. "Yes, the chairs can be tighter. It feels cozier that way." She caught me watching and handed me a garment bag. "You'll want to change into this. It'll look appropriate." Inside was a black dress, mine, retrieved from the garage. I recognized the faint smell of gasoline clinging to its hem. That evening, the party swelled. Laughter drifted across the yard, mingling with the clink of glasses and the muted notes of jazz from a Bluetooth speaker. Guests admired the home, every corner, every detail. "You have such exquisite taste," one woman gushed to Maddie near the fireplace. "This house is stunning. Did you design the interiors yourself?" Maddie smiled modestly, tilting her head in practiced humility. "It took a lot of work, but Daniel and I wanted everything to reflect our vision. We feel so blessed. Their vision, their house." I moved through the crowd, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, the stemware catching candlelight. Strangers took glasses without meeting my eyes, as though I truly were the hired help. In the kitchen, I rinsed empty plates while Maddie floated past, glowing under the compliments. Joan Miller and Mrs. Henderson, neighbors I had known for more than a decade, approached her by the counter. "She's wonderful with details," Joan whispered, gesturing vaguely toward me. "Oh, that's just Daniel's mother," Maddie said lightly, sipping from my favorite mug. "She likes to feel useful. It gives her purpose." The words landed like stones in my chest. Useful. Purpose. Reduced to a volunteer maid in the house I had purchased and preserved. The evening blurred into one long humiliation. Passing hors d'oeuvres, collecting empty glasses, overhearing guests marvel at Maddie's beautiful home. When someone complimented the crown molding, Maddie laughed and said, "We were very fortunate with this place. Right timing, you know?" By midnight, the last guest had gone. Maddie kicked off her heels in the foyer, sighing with satisfaction. "That went beautifully. Daniel made such good connections. Be a dear and finish tidying up, would you? My parents have an early flight." I turned back to the kitchen. The dishwasher hummed as I loaded it with champagne flutes that had cost me more than my first car. The tile was wet beneath my shoes. My reflection shone faintly in the dark window, lined and tired, my hair falling in strands around my face. With every plate I rinsed, I felt the weight of something building. Not just anger, but clarity. This charade had an expiration date. I didn't know the exact day yet, but I knew it was coming. A soft rustling woke me. At first, I thought it was the wind catching under the garage eaves, but when I sat up on the cot and pushed back the thin blanket, I saw the edge of paper under the door. Someone had slipped it through the crack. I padded across the cold linoleum, picked it up, and unfolded it. A list. Written in flawless cursive on heavy stationery, the kind that came in box sets from boutique paper shops. Laundry, grocery shopping, yard work, wash both cars, weed the garden, property maintenance. At the bottom, a cheerful flourish. "Thanks for being such a sport about everything. You're the best." Signed with a looping M. I stood holding it, the damp air from the garage settling around my ankles. My mother's quilt was still stacked beneath plastic near the tool cabinet, faintly smelling of oil. It struck me that the handwriting on this list was neater, more deliberate, than the note Daniel had taped to my door that first night. Maddie had taken time for this, her version of efficiency. As I read the words again, Another memory surfaced. Daniel, at 20, walking across the stage in his college cap and gown, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. He had waved, quick and shy, the way he always did when he wanted me to know he was proud. I remembered signing tuition checks, emptying my savings to keep him debt-free. Back then, gratitude had felt real. Now, years later, gratitude had curdled into entitlement. I folded the list carefully, slid it into my purse, and told myself, this one I keep. By noon, I was outside in gardening gloves, scraping dirt from under weeds that had no business thriving in January. Maddie stood on the back patio with Joan Miller and Mrs. Henderson, both women I had invited to countless summer barbecues when Daniel was still in high school. "Oh, there she is," Maddie said brightly, waving at me as though I were a neighbor's child helping with chores. "Daniel's mother just loves keeping busy. She insists on doing all the yard work herself. We can barely stop her." Joan tilted her head, a little confused. "But isn't this—" Maddie cut in smoothly. "She has such a green thumb. It keeps her happy, really. We're lucky she enjoys it." I knelt in my own garden, mud dampening the knees of my slacks, while the women nodded and smiled politely. To them, I was a retiree with too much time, grateful for odd jobs. Not the woman who had paid off the mortgage years ago. Not the owner. Just the help. That night, in the garage apartment, I pulled out my phone. The glow of the screen lit up the stacks around me. Boxes labeled winter clothes, photo albums under plastic, my grandmother's teacup stained and abandoned on a shelf. I began photographing everything. Click. The quilt's corner peeking out from under a plastic sheet. Click. The list in Maddie's cursive. Click. The tea mug still carrying the ring of someone else's lipstick. Each photo went into a folder on my laptop. I labeled it evidence. I also began recording voice memos. After each slight, I would slip into the garage, press record, and speak softly into the mic. January 4th. Maddie told neighbors I insist on yard work. She laughed when Mrs. Henderson said the roses looked better this year. Or, January 7th. Found my books boxed with fertilizer bags. Smells seeped into the pages. The act of speaking it aloud steadied me. It turned chaos into a record. Still, doubt whispered at the edges. Was I overreacting? Should I keep enduring this for Daniel's sake? But then I would see the quilt again, or the way my name was left off conversations in my own kitchen, and the answer hardened. That Saturday, after another full day of chores, I sat on the cot with the laptop balanced on my knees. My fingers hovered before I finally searched for the number I hadn't dialed in years. David Morris, attorney. We had first worked together when I updated my will after Daniel graduated. He was 68 now, sharp as ever, known for balancing compassion with precision. The phone rang 3 times, then his calm voice. "David Morris speaking." "David, it's Eleanor Carter," I said, surprised at how thin my voice sounded. "I need to ask you something. Confidential." "Of course, Eleanor. Is everything all right?" I took a breath. If family is living in my home and acting like they own it, what are my legal options? There was silence for a beat. Then, "Are we talking about tenants, squatters, or family?" I cut in. "My son and daughter-in-law. They were supposed to stay temporarily. It's been 2 years. I own the home outright, David. Paid off the mortgage years ago. The deed is in my name alone." "Then you are the sole owner," he said firmly. "They are your guests. Legally, you have every right to determine living arrangements. If they've forgotten that, sometimes a formal reminder is necessary. I can draft documents for you, ownership notice, clarification of terms, even a notice to vacate if it comes to that." I closed my eyes, relief and sadness twisting together. "Would you?" "I'll prepare everything by Monday. No rush tonight. Get some rest. But Eleanor, you are not powerless here." When I hung up, the garage felt warmer, though the heater hadn't switched on. I turned back to the laptop and added one more file, the call recording. By the time I finished, the folder labeled Evidence was filling with images, audio, scanned bank statements, and one saved voicemail from Daniel apologizing for not calling back after I'd wished him a Happy New Year. Piece by piece, the story was no longer just in my head. It was documented, preserved, ready. I leaned back, staring at the screen glow reflecting on plastic-wrapped boxes. My heart was still heavy, but it beat steadier. By Monday morning, I promised myself, I would no longer be just the help in my own house. I would be the owner again. David Morris's office always smelled the same, polish and leather, a mixture that carried both weight and comfort. The receptionist led me down the quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of legal milestones, judges shaking hands, ribbon cuttings, a young David fresh from law school standing beside his father. Rain spattered against the tall glass panes, Seattle in its typical February mood. When I stepped inside, David rose, gray suit impeccable, wire-rimmed glasses catching the dim light. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady, "you've brought yourself to the right place." On the desk lay a thick manila envelope, the flap sealed with a neat brass clip. David rested his fingertips on it before sliding it across the polished wood. "This," he said, "is how you remind them whose house it is, calmly, on paper." I touched the envelope as though it might burn me. Its weight felt disproportionate, as if the cardstock inside carried more than words: authority, boundaries, dignity. He walked me through the contents slowly, page by page. "First," he said, unfolding the top document, "the property deed. It states unequivocally that you are the sole owner, paid in full since 2008. No other names, no liens. This is your foundation." I nodded, fingers tightening in my lap. I remembered the crooked note Daniel had taped to my bedroom door. "Mom, guest room for you tonight. Thanks for understanding." Paper had been weaponized to push me aside. Now paper was the instrument of reversal. David placed the next sheet in front of me. "Second, a 30-day notice to vacate. It's not harsh. It's simply a clear timeline. They either respect your home or find another." My pulse quickened. The words on the page were crisp, without emotion, yet they cut sharper than anything Maddie had ever smirked my way. "Third," he continued, showing me the final form, "an option for a formal lease. $4,000 per month, plus utilities. That's fair market value for your neighborhood. I confirmed comps with a colleague." As if on cue, his office phone buzzed. He answered briefly, nodded once, and put the call on speaker. A polite female voice said, "Yes, Mr. Morris. Current listings within a mile are averaging $39.50 to $4,100 for comparable square footage. Demand is strong." "Thank you," he said, clicking off. Then he looked at me over his glasses. "The numbers speak, Eleanor. They're irrefutable. If they want to stay, they pay. If they can't, they leave." I pressed my thumb against the margin of the lease, the ink still faintly smelling of fresh toner. A strange calm settled over me. For weeks, I'd felt like driftwood, tossed, ignored, invisible. Now, in this office, with rain streaking the windows and legal pages stacked in my hands, I felt anchored again. David leaned back. "The law is on your side, but more than that, Eleanor, you're reclaiming respect. Deliver these with composure. No yelling, no threats. The silence afterward will be louder than shouting." I left his office with the envelope pressed to my chest beneath my coat, as though I were carrying something fragile through the storm. Downtown traffic hissed along wet streets. On the walk to my car, I noticed couples ducking under umbrellas, children in puffer jackets dragging parents toward crosswalks, baristas closing up cafes for the evening. Ordinary life. Mine had veered so far from ordinary, but maybe this envelope was the map back. Back at the garage apartment, the heater clanked as I set the envelope on my narrow counter. The stacks of plastic-wrapped belongings loomed in the dim light. I opened my laptop, the folder labeled Evidence still glowing on the screen. I added photographs from that morning, the garage clutter, the list Maddie had slipped under my door, the faded quilt that smelled of motor oil. I lined them beside the digital copies David had emailed me. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. Then I rehearsed. Standing before the small mirror propped on a shelf, I spoke aloud, voice steady but low. This is my house. The deed is in my name alone. Pause. You've been living here as guests. That ends today. Pause again. You have two choices. Leave in 30 days or sign this lease. 4,000 plus utilities. The words felt foreign at first, but after 3 repetitions they settled into my bones. I kept my sentences short, clipped. No apologies. My reflection stared back. Creased blazer, tired eyes, but a steadiness I hadn't seen since before Daniel's wedding. I remembered the crooked note taped to my door months earlier, how my hands had trembled pulling it off. Tonight, my hands no longer trembled. They signed. I pulled a fresh pen from the drawer, uncapped it, and in deliberate strokes signed each page. My signature looped with a steadiness I didn't expect. I sealed the envelope, pressing the clasp firmly shut. Then I carried it downstairs. The main house was quiet. Maddie must have been out at Pilates or brunch planning. I stepped into my kitchen, the same counter where she had once set her latte, ring of condensation bleeding into the wood grain without a coaster. I placed the envelope there, squarely in the center. The weight of it shifted the room. No laughter, no silk robes sweeping tile, no false hospitality. Just paper, authority, mine. Tomorrow at noon, I would hand her the papers, and the silence afterward would speak louder than shouting ever could. Maddie's manicured hand trembled as she unfolded the papers. The crisp crackle of the legal pages filled the living room, louder to me than the steady rain ticking against the windows. Her voice, usually smooth and coated with practiced charm, came out shrill and jagged. "You can't be serious," she said. I had prepared myself for that exact sentence. I let the words land, then simply adjusted the stack of documents on the coffee table with deliberate care. My fingers smoothed the edges against the polished surface, the same table where I had once served holiday meals, where Daniel had once rested his homework, where birthdays had been celebrated with candles and laughter. Now it held paper weapons, black ink on white stock that carried more weight than all her dramatics. I remembered another piece of paper, crookedly taped to my bedroom door the night I came home from Chicago. "Mom, guest room for you tonight. Thanks for understanding." A flimsy note meant to relegate me to the margins. That scrap had diminished me. These pages would not. The house was too quiet, except for the storm. Coats dripped on the hooks by the door. A faint sour odor rising from catered leftovers Maddie had left in the kitchen trash. On the side table sat a bone china cup with a thin crack spidering from its rim. I knew the set well. My grandmother's. Maddie had been careless with it last month, and every time I saw that crack, I felt the echo of how she treated me. Fragile, dispensable, already broken. "That," I said evenly, pointing to the top page, "is the deed, my name, my signature, paid in full." Maddie's eyes darted across the page, desperate for some loophole that did not exist. She pressed her lips together, then forced a brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. We're family. Daniel will never let you—" I slid the second document forward, my hand steady. "This is the 30-day notice to vacate. Legal, binding. Guests cannot mistake themselves for owners." Her laugh cracked into anger. "Guests? We've lived here 2 years." "As my guests," I said softly, every word clipped, deliberate. "Not as landlords, not as hosts, as guests." The third document waited like a quiet ultimatum. I placed it in front of her. "Or, if you prefer to remain, a lease. $4,000 a month. Market rate for this neighborhood. Due on the 1st. Nothing personal, just business." Maddie's hand twitched as though to snatch the page, then froze. Her voice sharpened. "We can't afford that. Daniel doesn't—" I pressed the button on my phone. The speaker came alive with her own voice, recorded weeks earlier, bright and dismissive. "Oh, that's just Daniel's mother. She likes to feel useful. It gives her purpose. Her head snapped up. The blood drained from her cheeks. I let the words echo, then lowered the volume. Would you like to hear more? I asked. I have plenty. Introductions where I ceased to exist. Neighbors who now believe I am some charity case. Photographs of my belongings stacked like trash. Shall I show you the quilt? I slipped the photograph onto the table. My mother's quilt, its faded blues and yellows, now smeared with the gray stain of motor oil. Another image, my winter coats under plastic sheeting, boxes labeled in Maddie's handwriting, garage. The room's air thickened. A key turned at the door. Daniel's footsteps approached, his heavy shoes carrying the weight of oblivion. He stepped into the living room, rain still glistening on his jacket shoulders. His eyes moved from the papers on the table to Maddie's tight grip on them. Confusion rippled across his face. What's going on? His voice wavered between irritation and unease. Your mother, Maddie snapped, is trying to evict us. His gaze landed on me. Mom? I held his eyes. I'm clarifying what's been blurred for too long. You've lived here rent-free for 2 years. That ends now. He blinked, stunned. But this is our home. Maddie and I. Read it, I said simply, nudging the deed toward him. Out loud, if you must. Reluctantly, Daniel sat on the couch. Drops from his jacket stained the rug beneath. He scanned the page, his lips shaping each word as if hoping they might rearrange themselves. Finally, his voice, quiet, reluctant. Sole ownership. Maddie lunged. She's twisting this. She's vindictive. You said... But I was not finished. From the folder, I drew one last sheet. Public records, I explained, placing it before him. Bankruptcies. 2. Under Maddie's name. The most recent, 3 years before you married. Daniel's head jerked as though struck. His fingers clutched the page. His eyes swept line after line, numbers and dates no longer deniable. Is this true? His voice cracked, raw. Maddie's tone turned defensive, almost hysterical. That's private! That has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with it, I said. He deserves to know the life you've hidden. The storm rattled the window panes. The crack in the china cup gleamed like a wound. Daniel collapsed into the armchair, pages limp in his trembling hands. His tie hung askew. His face, pale. Silence spread. I let it stay. Silence can be more powerful than shouting. Maddie's voice, small now, pleaded. Daniel, you can't let her do this. It's your house, too. His head turned slowly, as if weighed down. No, he whispered, then louder. No, it isn't. Her eyes widened, panic rising like a tide. I reached into the envelope one final time, drawing out a simple black pen. I laid it gently on the table. Its gleam under the lamplight was brighter than her diamond ring. You have 30 days, I said. My voice did not shake. Or you sign the lease tonight. No one moved. The rain beat harder. The crack in the cup seemed to widen. The pen lay between us, silent and untouched, heavier than any weapon. 2 weeks later, a locksmith's van idled in my driveway, and the low rumble replaced the echo of Maddie's orders. The side door slid open. A man in a navy sweatshirt lifted a tidy toolbox and gave me a small, businesslike nod. Ms. Carter? He asked. I said yes and led him through the house. Front door, back door, garage, kitchen slider. No speeches, no commentary. I remembered David's advice and kept it like a note tucked under my tongue. Document, don't dramatize. He set the toolbox on the mat, unscrewed the first cylinder, and the drill began its even whir. Brass shavings curled and fell like tiny ribbons. He worked neatly, testing the latch twice, writing part numbers on a paper form with a fine black pen. I photographed the form, his name, Evan, the time on the stove clock, the old lock in his hand, the new one in the door. When he finished the front, we walked to the back. I noted each change in my phone like mile markers on a road back to myself. 2 weeks earlier, Maddie had called a hotline and said the words elder abuse. The caseworker who came wore a navy cardigan and carried a tote with the county seal. We sat at my kitchen table. I slid the deed across the wood, then the notice, then the lease option, then the folder named evidence. Photos of the quilt stained by motor oil, the chore list in her perfect cursive, the stacks under plastic, voice memos recorded in a whisper, because even truth learns to keep its voice down. The caseworker asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if I needed services. I said I needed my house back. She closed her folder gently and left me her card. After she left, I found Maddie in my bedroom with my mother's jewelry box open, the flash on her phone bright against gilt edges. "For insurance," she said, not moving aside. "At your age, it's wise to catalog valuables." I didn't argue. I took a photo of her taking a photo, saved it, and called Rainier Lock and Safe. Now, Evan held up a new cylinder to the light. "Schlage," he said. "I'll key them alike, one key for everything." When he finished, he placed 3 warm brass keys in my palm, the teeth pressed into my skin, a small crescent signature. He would email the invoice. I typed the amount and the invoice number into notes and titled it what it was: Locks, Transfer of Power. The 30 days moved like the weather in Seattle, gray, then a bright hour, then fog again. Packing tape squealed, boxes multiplied. Richard and Elaine reappeared, respectful of nothing but schedule. They carried lamps I had never liked, just a wall mirror. "Fine, okay." Daniel worked slower. He folded T-shirts with that careful focus he'd had as a boy, wrote books on a box, and then crossed it out and wrote kitchen. Twice he asked if I needed anything. Twice I told him I needed us to keep our voices low. That was all. On day 21, the HOA newsletter arrived blotched with rain. Mulch delivery dates, reminders about the speed on our curve, a cheerful paragraph about the spring cleanup. I smoothed it on the counter with the flat of my hand and slid it into the drawer with the rubber bands. Ordinary paper in an ordinary drawer. I breathed a little easier. On day 24, Maddie held out a list of her items. Some were hers. Those I set aside. She pointed at others that were not. The teapot my sister gave me, the framed print from a road trip I'd taken alone and loved. "We picked that together," she said. "I'll do without it," I answered, and wrote teapot, Eleanor, in my notebook. Sun slid across the floor and touched the toe of her shoe and then kept going. On day 28, Daniel knocked on the garage apartment door and waited. When I said come in, he came in. He looked around as though he were visiting a museum of his own, forgetting. Boxes labeled winter coats, photos, Christmas lights. He handed me a business card. Claire Donaldson, LMHC, Tuesdays at 5. "Sliding scale," he added, embarrassed and proud at once. "Good," I said. We did not fix the past. We named it and let the naming hold. On day 30, the trunk closed, the engine turned, and Maddie left without a goodbye. The sound faded at the corner. The house inhaled. I washed 2 plates and 1 skillet after a small dinner I made for myself, then opened the jewelry box and touched the gold locket and the pearls I'd bought the year I burned the mortgage. Not everything needed photographing now. Some things could be simply held. A week later, Daniel asked to bring groceries on Sunday. He arrived with Trader Joe's bags, a bouquet of eucalyptus, and a solemnity that looked like effort. He overcooked the chicken, set the table carefully, and used a coaster without asking. We ate and talked like people relearning a language. He washed the dishes and put the eucalyptus in a jar. The scent traveled down the hall like a new rule we both could live with. Neighbors drifted back. Joan rang with an apple pie and a nervous apology. We ate it warm at the island and said the kindest truths we could manage. Mrs. Henderson clipped peonies and told me she had been too ready to believe the better story. Margaret stopped by on a Sunday with a pecan pie and a confession about a PTA she'd been pushed from, the way people smile while they move you off the board. "We survive it," I said, and she squeezed my hand. One afternoon, a tall box arrived with a florist's logo. Inside, orchids stood like quiet lanterns. A card. "Thank you for your gift to Harbor House. Your generosity helps women and children move to safe, independent lives. Sarah Chen." I set the orchids on the dining table where the light caught their throats and wrote the check number in my ledger with the satisfaction of a gate closed and latched. By fall, Daniel's Tuesday texts said, "Doing the work." He sent photos of a gray wall he painted and a bowl of mints from the therapist's waiting room. On Sundays, he kept bringing groceries and better chicken. We learned where the silence belonged and where it didn't. We talked about what respect feels like at the speed of an ordinary weeknight. Cherry blossoms returned the next spring. I mulched the beds, coiled the hose, and tucked marigolds into warm soil. The quilt, laundered and sun-dried, lay again at the end of my bed. The cracked cup stayed on the top shelf. I reached instead for the uncracked one and poured coffee into the space I had made for myself. The keys lived in a shallow dish by the door. Each time I set them down, they chimed soft as water. An unfamiliar number left a voicemail one evening. I carried the phone to the porch, listened to the wind chime answer the breeze, and did not press play. I pressed delete. Choosing peace is often quieter than the noise that made it necessary. The house is what it has always been, a shelter that asks for light bulbs and gutters cleared, and someone to notice when the hinge loosens. I notice again. I stand in the kitchen with Trader Joe's flowers opening on the table and the HOA newsletter folded to the block party page and the morning slipping like silk off the windows. I lift an uncracked china cup, sip, and think, at 62, I am finally at home in my own house. When I finally held the new keys in my hand and sipped from an uncracked cup, I knew peace could be as simple as claiming back what was already mine. Life taught me that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors we choose who to open for. Families stumble and love bends, but respect is the ground it all stands on. If my story reminds you of your own, I'd love to hear how you've reclaimed your dignity or rebuilt peace at home.